or good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when this finds you. And I just want to talk a little bit today about some different subject areas, but in my opinion, I think they're all going to flow together. You can put the pieces together and see how it all works. And going to talk somewhat about my family as well. And what most of you don't know is practically every video I do, I'm talking about my family too. I don't want people to think that I'm always just talking at them because I've lived a lot of these experiences with my family as well. But for years, we've complained about the lack of wealth in the Black community. And yes, there are some disparities that must be addressed. And the system has done a masterful job of making sure that we don't get bank loans to start businesses in our race. The system will give foreigners loans to open businesses in Black neighborhoods, but it won't give Blacks those same dollars to open and operate businesses in Black neighborhoods. They only give loans to the people they know are going to remove the money at the end of the day that they've collected from Black people to deplete the Black communities of their financial resources. There are many advocates out there who want to discuss and implement reparations. And, the Democrats are always talking about a discussion, but they never act upon anything. They're always setting up a committee or a commission or going to have a discussion. We're going to talk about it. And that's all they ever do is talk about it. They never act on anything when it comes to us, but they act on stuff with everybody else. But this is not a political discussion. And based on the history of this country, almost every group has been offered some type of compensation, except when it comes to Blacks. And yeah, I know there are a few other groups out there who say they didn't get anything either. But let me say something to those groups. Your ancestors did not build this country for over 200 years free of charge. Your ancestors were not forced to come here against their will. Your ancestors were not minding their own business when they were captured and sold for profit. All of the groups who say they never got any compensation voluntarily came here. So don't try to compare the struggles of your ancestors with the struggles of mine. There's no way you can even compare them. We are told to get over slavery because it was so long ago. We are told none of us were slaves, so get over it. We're told that no person living today owns slaves, so get over it. We're told a playing field is now level, so get over it. We're told that affirmative action is available now, so get over it. Well, the playing field has never been level because the other folks had a 200-year head start economically. And understand all of them, because all of them didn't own slaves. A very small percentage owned slaves. And so those families there are a lot of families right today still living off the wealth that was created for them during slavery. And there are some people say their family never owned slaves, they never owned slaves, they were poor. But I mean, be honest with yourself, other people. You have derived a benefit for your skin not being Black when it has come to some type of opportunity. I saw it in jobs I worked at. I never said the other guys were rich, but the promotions came because their skin wasn't Black. So the playing field has never been level. We are constantly told to constantly get over it, but every other group can always talk about the atrocities inflicted upon their ancestors from the past. There are still many people who feel great sympathy for the Native American. Study who the Native American was. We're reminded every year about the Holocaust. We're reminded every year on December 7th of the pre-planned attack on Pearl Harbor. We're reminded every year about the pre-planned attack of 9/11. All of these incidents happen in the course of a day or a few years, and we're constantly reminded of them. But slavery, Black folks, you need to get over that. Forget about that. You wasn't living, and neither were we. As a people, are we tired of being behind a financial 8 ball yet? Are we tired of living paycheck to paycheck? Are we tired of not being able to do more things in our lives? Are we tired of saying I wish? Are we tired of not being able to do for people who have needs? Are we? Or are we comfortable in that discomfort? A guy named David Beasley is actually the head of the United Nations World Food Program. And he actually said that 2021 was going to be catastrophic based on what we're seeing at this stage in the game, because for several countries, famine is knocking on the door. And a survey was actually done a few months ago, and it was actually found that over 40% of the surveyed households with children had used up all of their savings, or most of it, by early August of this year. And if the children were living in a household that earned less than $100,000 a year, they were impacted the worst, because 74% of those families actually experienced financial problems to a serious degree. Now, what's the average income for a black family in this country? Less than $50,000. We scrape the bottom of the economic barrel. So if a family that earns $100,000 a year is struggling, you don't even have to tell me your situation, because we already know. The Mortgage Bankers Association said in America, in the month of September alone, 6 million people failed to make their rent or mortgage payments in September. Now, on the whole scale, if it's hit the whole society that bad, how bad has it hit Black America, who are already at the bottom of the economic barrel, and a large number of them living in single-parent homes? What happens to a family with only one breadwinner, being a woman, and she happens to get sick or she's unable to perform on the job? Because in reality, she can never afford to get sick. She can never afford to get hurt. She can never afford to be in an accident. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about an area that I personally think destroys the process of trying to build a strong financial foundation and a strong family structure. But it gets overlooked by many of our Black cultural advocates, our Black cultural so-called leaders, our Black social workers, and here I go again, Black preachers. I want to talk about how a spirit of responsibility creates situations that block the opportunity to create financial security for our families and our future generations. And yeah, when we die, we can't take it with us, but we need to be able to leave something for our future generations so they're not scraping the bottom of the economic barrel themselves. When we have our men and women reproducing kids with several different mates all over the place, with no intent to desire or desire to marry, is it any wonder why we have brokenness in more ways than one in our communities and families? Nothing is ever 100%, so don't get mad because I'm not painting a broad brush for everybody. I know every situation is unique, but as a whole, because there have been, over the last half century, there have been studies done showing what happens in a single parent household. And this is nothing new. They've been saying for years that when you don't have a married couple in the house, the chance of poverty greatly increases. And right today, over 71% of Black children live in single parent homes. And there's evidence in different studies that show that poverty impacts our health in a negative way and actually reduces our life expectancy. Now, in comparison, only 27% of white children live in single-parent homes. And if you've been following the last few videos, you've heard me mention the feminist movement. I'm getting ready to mention it again. The movement apparently wanted women, well, let me say what the word they use in an interrogation room or in a courtroom. The movement allegedly wanted women to assert themselves. The movement was started by white women. Now, based on the stats I just gave you about the single parent homes, which side lost? 71% of black women with children live alone, and 27% of white women live alone with children. So a movement that was supposedly earmarked to help white women, even though they came out and said they were trying to help the black woman. Well, they helped the black woman accomplish the goal they wanted for the black woman. But the movement actually helped to destroy the black family. And as I've stated before, that was always the goal. Or one of the major goals, because there were a few others, but it all leads to the same road. A single income increases the chance that a child will grow up in poverty, and each time you reproduce and add another child, the poverty gets much stronger in the family, and it gets much worse. And some of our women resort to unspeakable things to pay the bills. And sometimes the older child sees a struggle in the family, and they're kind of put in a situation where they need to help mom provide an income to help feed the younger kids. And since that child has no marketable skills, they're going to have to take a minimum wage job. And because of the child labor laws on the books, they're only going to be allowed to work so many hours a week while school's in session. So how much would a child be able to contribute to the family finances? It's been a while since I was a teenager. And at the time I got my first on paper job, because I started cutting grass at age 10. I wanted my own money. Didn't want to have to ask my parents for money. They wasn't going to give it to me anyway. But the minimum wage at the time was $3.35 an hour. And on average, I worked between 10 to 20 hours a week during the school weeks. And it also depended on what day of the week my football game was on. If it was on Thursday, I could work Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Of course, Sunday goes over to the next week. If the game was on Friday, we would get out of practice early on Thursday, but not really early enough for me to go to work. So I would work basically Saturday and Sunday. My high school girlfriend thought because I had a job, I should be able to spend a lot of money on her. And I was a senior. I had senior dues and expenses. I was also the school king. And from time to time, me and the school queen would have to go represent our school as ambassadors at different schools. And we even got invited to one of the local universities as ambassadors one evening. And for these events, I would have to rent tuxedos. And so my resources were very limited at the time. And after taxes hit, I didn't have a whole lot to work with. But she didn't understand, or she didn't want to. So she found her a guy who could spend money on her that was selling dope. And so I couldn't compete with that. But how much do you think a child working a minimum wage job with limited hours is going to be able to provide to the household? So guess what a lot of our teenage boys do? And I grew up with a lot of them. They turn to the streets, robbing, stealing, or selling dope. And sometimes they do all of them. The stealing gives them access to goods that don't belong to them that can actually be turned over for quick cash. And the drugs provide much more cash in a shorter amount of time. And mom normally knows the kid is involved in illegal activity, but she needs the money, so she looks the other way. And then when that same kid gets shot down in the street, she wants to scream over his casket talking about my baby. Sure, I know there are many men who've abandoned their families and don't pay child support. But did you know that the black men are the number one payers of child support in this country? But the system has to condition society that the black father is a deadbeat, so that's all we continue to see, that's all we continue to hear. Now, get a load of this. The number one group of people who default on child support today is actually white men, and that came from white people. But that is never told to society. Our women complain about they cannot afford things, and they get the child support, and then they'll spend that child support on their own personal grooming, their own personal clothing, vacations and trips, enjoying their lives, hanging out with their friends while the kids are in school that the man, the father of the kids, is paying for. While at the same time neglecting the needs and the care of the child she's getting the money from that she claims to love. Now, I never had children, but I know of these type of things happening within my own family. And then they run around talking about how hard they had it. Sure, there's some deadbeat fathers out there, and I'm not going to deny that. But the woman chose to lay with the deadbeat. So if he's a deadbeat, what is she for laying down with him? Hey, get mad all you want to. I don't care. The system is put in place to break up the family, especially the black family. In order to do that, they have to destroy the foundation of the family, which is the man. I guarantee you, if they came out tomorrow and said the government won't be giving you any more support, lots of women will all of a sudden figure out how to make a relationship with their kid's father work out. I guarantee you. When we didn't have government intervention in our families, that's what we did as a people. Our families made their relationships work. Once government does everything it can to help the family disintegrate, then they take it upon themselves to go after the deadbeat they work so hard to create because they don't want this guy to make it financially. Why do you think they want to stay involved every time the man gets a raise or get a new job with higher pay? Because when he gets a raise, they're going to reevaluate his situation so they can take more money from him. We need our men and women educated on this system and how it's destroying our families and how we are right in step with it. The system will lock up our men for non-payment of child support. Now, how is that going to work out for you if he's locked away rotting in a cell? And when he gets out, how is that going to work out for you getting child support? Because if he had a decent job before he went in, he doesn't anymore. And because he now has a record, who's going to hire him at a decent rate of pay? I'm not giving men a pass. There are scores of black men all over the country who have produced multiple kids with multiple women with no means to provide or care for them. It was a momentary feeling that had long-term consequences. In my book, But Hey, What Do I Know?, available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or directly from me at myranjones@gmail.com, I talk about 3 different cases of black men who each had a minimum of 20 kids in the Memphis, Tennessee area, and I believe it was a minimum of 25 if I'm not mistaken. One guy's nickname was Drop a Seed because the last time I checked, which was when I was doing the research for the book, he had either, I can't remember exactly, I haven't read the book lately, went through the book lately, but he had either 28 or 32 kids by 15 different women. And he was begging the judge for mercy because he worked at a minimum wage job. Now let's stop right there for a moment. First of all, what did this guy tell each woman who laid down with him? Did he say to her, I know I don't take care of my other 20 kids, but this time it's going to be different with you? Did he say, I really like you or I love you? I mean, did he say, I've been working at the same minimum wage job for the last 15 years because he had been on his job for a number of years and he was still making minimum wage, and that's a whole nother issue. But he's been working at the same minimum wage job for the last 15 years, but he has a lot of ambition. I mean, how did a guy like this even get close to a woman unless her self-esteem, self-worth, and self-image was so poor that he could have told her anything? I mean, really? What did he tell her for her to allow him into her womb unprotected? This guy had a very couple fruitful years where he had twins born on more than one occasion, while other women were also having kids for him. And he was actually in court because he had defaulted on his payments. Now get this. Each woman was receiving about $2 a month per child for child support, and he defaulted on that. And I just read an article my grandson shared about a rapper who had just had his 6th child, and his 6th child is on the way, and the guy is only 21 years old. We have black athletes and entertainers who also continue to produce recklessly. One retired NFL player was paying almost $50,000 a month in child support when he was active because he had produced kids all over the country. One of our young black female Olympians who was going to be participating in her last Olympics had to miss out on the Olympics one her last time because she was pregnant with a baby for a guy who already had 8 children with 7 different women already. And I can even talk about my own family. I never met my biological dad until I was 22. Over the years, I continued to reach out to him to no avail. He lives in another state, and if I ever have plans to pass that way, I try to make sure to call and ask if we could just meet up for a few minutes. Because I think it's disrespectful to pass through his hometown and not at least stop and try to speak. Even though he and I never had a relationship, there's still a respect factor there because without his seed, I don't have life. You understand what I'm saying? And I've called him and told him when I'm coming. And then when I'll get to town and call his phone, he would never answer. Now, he's originally from Houston. He was actually drafted by the Houston Oilers back in the day when we still had a old football team here. He never played for them, but he was a good athlete as well, and he got drafted. So he's from Houston. Went to school in Louisiana, the big university over there. All of you know who it is. And went on an athletic scholarship. But he's visited Houston many times over the years, and not once has he ever called me. I'm almost half a century old, and right today, I have zero communication with him. But it isn't a lack of trying on my part. I remember when my wife and I were dating, she would actually tell me all the time, she said, you need to try to know your daddy. And I said, well, I didn't grow up with him. What I need to know him for? And she said, well, things don't work out between us. She said, and you start getting out there dating again. She said, you meet a young lady, you fall in love, y'all get married. She said, you might be years down the road and find out that's your sister. I said, nah. Because all those years, that part of the family had hid that from us. Hid that from me. Because I found out later that the family knew about other siblings. But they want to keep them secrets. And so I found out just not even 10 years ago. Well, I found out I had another sister about 10 years ago. I found another sister 8 years ago. And a couple of decades ago, I heard I had another sister that was a few months younger than me. So it hasn't been from a lack of trying on my part. And I'm glad I found the Bible because I got my identity that I needed. When people show you who they are, believe them. And he's shown me and my other sister that he wants no part of us in his life. And both of us have come to accept it because out of all the siblings, we keep in touch with each other almost on a daily basis. So we've come to accept it. And I think I share his seed with 8 or 9 other siblings. I say 8 or 9 because I don't know. I heard about the sister that was a few years younger than me, but nobody wants to talk about it. And I heard she died at age 20. So I don't know. That's why I say 8 or 9. But it goes to those family secrets that we like to keep hidden. Between him and my mother, I do not have a 100% sibling on earth. And when you add up all of my brothers and sisters between the two of them, that's 13 or 14 of us. But my grandfather, who I never met really in reality, I think I had met him one time before he died. I shouldn't say met, I should say I never knew him either. And when I met him that one time, it was at my great grandmother's funeral on that side. And I used to talk to her on the phone all the time, but, still didn't really know her. But my granddaddy set a poor example. I was talking with the sister one day, and we were talking about how many children he had. And we actually stopped counting at about 42. Yeah, you heard that right, 42. And as far as I know, my biological dad and his sister, my aunt, are the only two from his marriage. So yeah, I'm talking about my family, and I don't care who in my family gets upset about it. One of the biggest problems in the black family, we want to continue to sweep things under the rug instead of addressing the destructive behavior. Can we build wealth and strong family units that way? Nope. Let me ask you a question. If our black men are producing kids all over the place with multiple women, how can wealth be created if a great amount of that money is going into child support payment? And no, you never heard me say one time that my dad or granddad were paying child support. I'm making an observation on wealth creation. How can you produce healthy children in an unhealthy environment? Yes, an environment without two caring and loving parents is unhealthy. And that could be one parent in the home or two parents in the home. If they're not caring and loving, it's unhealthy. I don't care how much mom loves us. Without the father, the environment is lacking the biggest piece of the puzzle because our identity comes from our father, not the mother. Mom is the incubator. She's the incubator when it's time to carry the egg. And then when a baby is born, she incubates it throughout the growth period. All an incubator is a controlled environment for protection and care. And yes, as I stated, sometimes when a dad is in the home, the environment is worse if he is actually detached mentally. If there are multiple kids from one man, how can that man be available to each child in a loving way? It's not possible. You cannot be with all 10 of your kids if all of them have different mothers. So look at how many broken homes and broken families these men continue to create. I never knew my biological grandfather, as I stated. He died a little less than 4 months after I got married. And once I entered college, I tried reaching out to my biological dad, and every time I wanted to meet him, or come to the area and just hang out for a couple of days just to talk, he always had an excuse as to why we couldn't meet. I wasn't looking for anything, just relationship. I wasn't looking for him to give me anything because at that point, I was 19 years old the first time I reached out to him. I just wanted to know who he was because my mom had married my stepdad when I was about 7, 8 years old. I don't even remember how old I was. It was around that time. And so he had raised me. But even he had 5 kids by 5 different women himself. And he was only in the life of one of them. See how our families get all messed up? Then our women will allow the system to come in and help them raise the kids. And it sets up a predictable situation. What do I mean by that? The government system of welfare comes in if she's not getting child support. So the woman takes in a welfare in many cases, which creates an environment of system dependency. Her kids grow up seeing that there are certain roles they should play once they become adults, and they tend to follow suit. That's why they say poverty just keeps being passed along from one generation to the next. Our girls see mom depending on the system for sustainability, so she thinks that's the role she's supposed to play. And the cycle of dependency keeps going. Our boys see that their dad is not in the picture, so he believes he should also fulfill that role of being an absentee father. He watches his mother depend on the system his entire young life, and because of what I stated earlier about the life of crime, he thinks his role is to remain in the clutches of the system. So he grows up in a welfare system, and then he transfers through his actions and behavior his life to the penal system. If we keep having these types of situations in our black families, how can we ever build strong, cohesive family units? How can we produce functional children? How can we model proper examples of what a family looks like? Have you ever paid attention to many of the commercials on television? In about 90% of commercials where there is a couple, it's almost always a non-black couple. Or when you see a black person with a family in a commercial, it's almost always a mixed family with only one parent being black. Believe it or not, that is conditioning not only society, but it also tells us that there is no such thing as a positive black family unit with two parents. Think about the commercials with athletes. You remember the commercial that used to come on with the Manning boys, Eli and Peyton? They were with their father. When we saw Donovan McNabb, he was with his mother. Even more recently, we can see the actor Anthony Anderson in commercials with his mother. And what that tells society is that white families are strong with the presence of the father, and there's no such thing as a father in the picture with the black family. Let me say this again. Identity comes from the father, not the mother. And sadly, our women have been forced to try and fill dual roles as the mother and father. How many of you remember a few years ago when one of the greeting card companies put out the African American Father's Day card, say, Happy Father's Day, Mom? Why were the only cards that said that directed at black women or the black family? And as I got older, I started to understand things going on with me. And I'm always striving to learn something new each day. Society has actually done a masterful job of making sure our attention is so focused on everything else except self-improvement, self-awareness, and self-discovery. I grew up without an identity because I had no relationship with my biological dad. My mother had no relationship with her biological dad. So my mom had a void in her life because in reality, she didn't know who she was. And I had no clue as to who I was because my mom had no clue who she was. And I didn't have a relationship with my biological dad, so I didn't know who I was. So I grew up as a kid without an identity, but a strong will. Now, we can lead productive lives without knowing this, but there's always a void when we don't know. My stepdad came into my life when I was around 6. And although he filled the physical void, he couldn't pass identity to me or my sister right up under me because he wasn't our biological dad. He would later change our last name to Jones. And when this happened, I had 2 years left in high school. And I hated he and my mother for changing my name that late in life. And to be honest with you, I would have hated them for changing it at any stage in my life. But to wait until right before I graduated high school, it really upset me. He would always tell me from then on that I was Jones, and he wanted someone to be able to carry his name. He repeatedly told me, "You're Jones now." And he continued that on a regular basis. And each time he would say it, I would cringe inside. And I would be saying in secret, "No, I'm not a Jones." He was trying, in essence, to force his identity upon me. And as a strong-willed young man, I was mentally doing everything in my power to reject it. It was an artificial identity, AI. They call it artificial intelligence, artificial identity. It actually equates to the same thing. And I wasn't going to have children and give them Jones as a last name. And I know you can name your kids whatever you want to, but I wasn't going to do it. I didn't know how to go about changing my name back when I turned 18, so I let it be. But I never liked the name. And to be honest, I still don't. My thoughts were, and I talk to my woodshop teacher all the time, and he has told me over the years, he said, when I met you as a 9th grader, he said there was something different about you. He said, I never knew what it was. He said, but your mind was always different. He said it was always very advanced for your age. He said, but I didn't want to tell you that as a kid because I didn't want you to get the big head. And so my thoughts were, he had 3 other sons that didn't carry his name, and they were his biological sons. But he wanted to give it to me so that I could carry on his family legacy. Not going to happen. Make no mistake, I love my stepdad, but it wasn't always that way. I respected him. I always respected him because I always understood, even though nobody had physically taught me, I always understood submission and rebellion. Even as a little kid, I understood that. I respected him, but I didn't love him. And so some of you may be saying, well, what if your mom had met somebody that you did respect and love, and they decided they want to change their name? Well, in all honesty, it wouldn't have mattered what man had come into my mom's life. I would have rejected a name change from any of them. My mom would always tell me he wanted me to start calling him daddy once my name was changed. It never happened. My sister, always, the one right up under me, always tells my wife and her husband that everyone thinks she's the rebel, but in reality, Myron is a true rebel, but he does it in a quiet way. Well, there's something called righteous rebellion. And righteous rebellion is when you stand against things that are obviously wrong. Ephesians 6:4 has instructions for parents on how to deal with their kids. I don't know if I've talked about this scripture and other things. I know I've talked about it with somebody not too long ago, but it tells the parents not to stir up anger in their children. Bring them up properly. And even though I had a gentle countenance, I was always considered a gentle giant growing up. I was an angry child. I was angry. And the name change actually pushed me over the edge. Many of our parents only want to read the parts of the Bible where it says to honor your father and your mother, and honor your father and mother so that your days on earth may be long. But many parents don't want to respect the Bible when it comes to reciprocating in what their obligations are. When I married my wife, the thought to change my stepson's name never crossed my mind. I wasn't his biological father, and I never tried to fill that role. I wanted to make sure I fill a role that I assumed. I wasn't going to try and be something that I wasn't, and I wasn't his biological father. But I did take on the role as the head and leader of the home. A pastor friend of mine and I were talking one day. This was a few years ago. And we were talking about the travesty in our culture with the irresponsibility, the babies all over the place without men and women. And unfortunately, our women get sympathy when they have a lot of kids. Our men get ostracized when they have a lot of kids. Our women will get, if the man is not around, our women will get taken care of by the system. But if our man has that many kids and not taken care of, he will get locked up in the system. So you got to start waking up, people. And my pastor friend said something. He said He said, women were made to follow a man's vision, even if that man's vision is wrong. He said, a woman will follow a man's vision if his vision is to rob a bank, because he at least has a vision, although it's a corrupted one. And that's why a lot of our women follow these no good charlatan black preachers in the pulpit, because at least the preacher has a vision, whereas her husband doesn't. And that's why you have so many issues within a home, in a black home. Because these preachers know what they're doing up in the pulpit when they start teaching things from the pulpit to try to basically become absentee husbands in these men and women's homes. And that's why a woman shouldn't go to church without a husband. See, y'all don't want to get into that conversation. But I'm not going to even get on that right now. But you shouldn't even be going to church as a woman without your husband. If he's sitting at home, you sit at home and study the Bible yourself until God whoops that head enough where he say, hey, why don't we get up and go to church together? Because if the woman is getting up taking the kids to church without the father, another man has assumed responsibility over his home. See, like I said, I don't even want to get into that. But when my buddy made that statement, it made sense to me as to how women just willingly give up their wombs to smooth talkers. Women were created with a hearing mechanism that most women would think is absent in us men. And they're probably right. So although as men, we should listen to our women, we were not created with that in the big scheme of things as listeners. That's not our nature. Men have nature, women have nurture. So that's why Eve and the serpent were so easy to communicate. And see, it goes back to what I just said about letting the woman go to church without the man, because the serpent man, see, the serpent was walking. If you remember the Bible, it said God told the serpent, "You're gonna crawl on it. I'm gonna take the feet from under you, and you're gonna crawl on your belly for the rest of your life." So the serpent was walking. So the serpent man was telling Eve his vision instead of Adam painting the vision for Eve. So when our vision is not there, what Habakkuk say? Write the vision down, make it plain, so that he who sees it may run. What does the Bible also say? A people, a man without vision shall perish. And what we're seeing in our race is a lot of perishing going on because we have no vision, because everything we do is basically short term. We can't see past tomorrow. So Eve was listening to another man when it should have been Adam painting a vision for her. And since that day in the garden, all of society has been messed up because of Adam's sin. God never really went looking for Eve. God came for Adam because God had given Adam the instruction, not Eve. Because if you remember over in Corinthians, it says there's a vertical line of authority, and that goes God, Christ, man, woman. Okay, so we're not going to get off into that. But our women have to start to have more respect for their womb when a smooth operator comes onto the scene. I know we have all of these background checks today. If you want to look up somebody, I even looked up myself the other day. They had the trial period. I had a American Express gift card that had like $1.79 on it, and they had they were running a special on the trial period for 99 cents. So I think 14 days or something. I paid the trial to get the full report on myself. After I downloaded the full report on myself, I canceled the trial and threw the American Express in the trash. But they had some people on my profile that said were family members of mine, I've never met, said we lived together, I've never met. And there were some other issues on there that had no connection to me, but they had it in the system. So these background checks are not always accurate. Our women need to get back to the old practice of letting their mothers and fathers meet these guys before they decide to give up their womb. I mean, there used to be a practice where the fathers and mothers would actually vet the potential suitor, the potential mate. I mean, I hear you. Some parents made poor decisions in their relationship themselves, so they're not exactly the type of people you want to decide if your potential mate has character, integrity, and morality. And we laugh at this practice that some cultures right today still practice. But look at the divorce rate in our race. And, it's not just our race, it's across, all cultures. But once again, other cultures don't really get talked about with the divorce rate. I mean, the folks they always want to study us. They always want to tell everybody how bad we doing. But we have to stop hooking up with any old person that cross our path. Everything that is good to us ain't always good for us. Mary McLeod Bethune said that the race is measured by the character of our women. And that's a great statement by Miss Bethune. But I also have issues with Miss Bethune because Miss Bethune was part of the Black eugenics movement that said you unfit ones need to be aborted. So if that's the character of our women, we in trouble. Black woman, stop giving your womb to these men who can't wait for the latest Xbox or PlayStation to come out. Start seeking a man that wants to build a family, create wealth, lead you properly, and plan life for the future as long as we're on this side. We will never build wealth as long as the decisions we make in the moment are emotional. Emotional decisions are good in some cases, but many of our emotional decisions tend to cause us harm in one form or another, long term. Women with multiple kids normally raise those kids in a poor environment because they didn't properly vet their male suitor. You know, kind of like most voters don't vet their political candidates. And look at society because of that. And look at the black family because of that. When daddy is absent, a lot of black women place their sons in a position almost as if he's her man. And we wonder why a lot of our men never break away from that stronghold to make sure his mom is always more important than his wife. And when you wonder why you have problems with your woman, you need to look at the relationship with your mother. When we see our sons and daughters raised in these types of environments and follow our examples, it's no wonder why we're not able to get ahead. When we have multiple situations such as this, the only thing that can happen is these groups of kids grow up and interact and intermarry with one another, thereby increasing the dysfunction. So we have broken women with absentee husbands raising broken kids morally, spiritually, and financially, and then it manifests itself physically in the way we live. There's a doctor I listen to quite a bit, and he's helped me to understand a whole lot of why some people make it financially and why some people don't. And he's not just talking about finances, but finances is a great area, great topic to focus on. But he said we received our programming for life in virtually every subject from our environment, starting at the moment of conception. The moment the sperm met the egg and we started forming within our mother's womb, that's when our ideology will start to be formed. He said our mothers were mentally programming us in the womb before we were born. And once we were born, up until age 7, we got all of our programming from everyone we had close contact with. And sadly, he said that we are living our lives based on that programming we got in the first 9 months before we were born, and then the following 7 years of our lives. He said the reason many people are poor is because mom and dad programmed them to be poor with their daily habits, their daily rituals, and their daily talk, and the stuff they were feeding their brain, be it television, books, whatever. How many of you heard growing up that some people are just meant to be poor? I mean, I heard it. How many of you were taught that money doesn't grow on trees? Well, fiat currency does grow on trees. Where's the paper come from that they put that green ink with pictures in them on? How many times did you ask your parents for something growing up and were told there was no money to do that? How many of you took family vacations growing up? I remember growing up as a kid. I remember taking one family vacation to Six Flags over in Dallas, and then we visited the caves over in San Marcos. That was it. I was 7, 8 years old. However old I was a little kid. That was it. I never left the state of Texas until me and my cousins rented a Jeep to go to a family reunion back in Louisiana at age 19. That's the first time I'd ever left the state of Texas. And since that time, I've been to, I believe, about 23, 24 of the states around the country and Mexico. But how many times were you told no when you asked for something and money was the reason? And I bet it was never because there was an abundance of it. I listened to a guy who said he has always hated wire clothes hangers. And he had an affinity for Coca-Cola. And he didn't understand why. And he found out later that his mother had actually tried to abort him. And many of you know that wire hangers were actually the method many women used to abort their babies. And during that time, he asked his mom about the soda, and she said when she was pregnant with him, that's all she drank all day, every day. See how the actions of his mother while he was in the womb impacted his life? She didn't have to say a word. Her actions created something in his life. So if we are poor, we also got some poor programming. But how can we get different programming if our parents are continuing to stress themselves on a daily basis about money? If they're thinking about it, more than likely they're verbalizing it in one form or another. And I heard a lot growing up that rich people have way too many problems, so I shouldn't try to become rich. Do you know any poor people without problems? But I was also encouraged to work hard and try to make it to the NFL so I could provide for the entire family. Now, there are people out in society right today that believe there's a set amount of money that is biblical. I never found that scripture. As a matter of fact, I have a video on this channel on money from a biblical perspective titled There's No Virtue in Poverty. Some people have fixated in their mind that God wants us to be poor. Doesn't Deuteronomy 28 tell us that poverty is a curse? But before we even get that far in the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 11, verse 26, it actually says that I've given you a choice between blessings and curses. That's what it is. And he said he's given us a choice. So however we're living, we chose to live that way. There are some folks out there who have this mysterious belief that God wants us to be poor. And unfortunately, they pass that broke thought process on to their children. How many of these broke advocates are able to do something for those in need financially? You can't feed people if you don't have any money to buy food. You can't help the homeless if you don't have any money to help them. The number one thing they say most homeless people are looking for is socks. How many of you bought some socks lately? Can't do that stuff if you don't have any money. If we want to rise up financially, we have to stop with this irresponsible behavior of producing kids all over the place. We can't build wealth when our dollars are wrapped up in child support. We can't build wealth if our parents are separated and one parent is trying to raise kids on their own and the other parent has created an entirely new family to take care of on top of the one he abandoned. You think you're going to come up like that as a people? We can't build wealth if we're constantly having to hire lawyers when our children and our men get into legal trouble. Isn't it amazing that once our men are in the penal system, they're described as model inmates? Why can't they model that behavior without an overseer before going into the system? If they modeled that behavior, many of them could avoid the whole process because they would be seeking to enlarge their lives and the lives of their families in the right way. Yes, I know there are situations that unfairly target many of our young black men. I'm not speaking of the injustice aspect. I'm speaking of the voluntary participation aspect that is guaranteed to secure us a place behind bars if we commit a crime. We can't build wealth when we spend lots of our dollars on video games. We can't build wealth if we're not building businesses. We cannot build wealth if we continue to only operate from the left side of the financial quadrant, which means all we ever do is change our time for money. We can never build wealth if we have to constantly upgrade to the newest cell phone every time a newer model comes out. We can never build wealth if we're always stuck paying car notes. As blacks, we have been conditioned that the only way for us to make it is through athletics or entertainment. And I've actually read some books that were talking about black athletes. I just bought another one, I didn't just bought it. I bought it some time back. I just hadn't got around to reading it yet. I have about 90 books that need to be read, but because I'm always searching for information, but I've probably got about 600 or 700 that I have already read. I think it's about I mean, I'm talking about physical books. I have about, I think last time I checked, there's about 800 ebooks I have as well. And I've read some of those as well, but not all of them. But we've been conditioned that the only way for us to make it is through athletics and entertainment. Have you looked at how these black folks who make it that way get screwed over when they pass, or later on in their life when their careers are basically on a downward spiral, or they're no longer participating? I mean, look at what happened to Wesley Snipes. Look what happened to Red Fox. I mean, that's just a couple. I was encouraged for sport, to make it in sport, just like many others out there. Now, a young man actually has a better chance of being struck by lightning in both eyes twice before he gets drafted into the professional sports rank. I didn't make it, but I played ball in high school and college with some guys who did have that choice and had it happen in their lives. But those careers are very short term. The reason many of our parents encourage this is because they are looking for that child to improve the mediocre lifestyle they've created because they chose not to pursue a better path for their own lives. Although athletes are highly paid, they still earn their income on the left side of the financial quadrant. And they never learn how to properly handle money either in most cases because they also got broke programming early on in their lives. Some of them got proper training as kids, and we can see that in what a lot of them did after their playing days were over. But the great majority didn't. And that's why 5 years after they last played, their net worth is less than $1 million. Now, for guys who make more than that in 6 months of the year, that's a really terrible statistic. Many of these guys make more for one game than most people make in an entire year. And in spite of that, they too lack financial awareness. So we have to stop reproducing children irresponsibly. Not only to work toward creating wealth, but we need to stop being irresponsible in order to stop creating multiple broken homes all over the place, causing our youth to grow up with a lack of awareness as to who they really are and who they really can be.